talked to her. I said, I love you, Jimmy. And she says, I love you too, Mom. And we hung up.
Gina Mordecki is still in mourning, a year after her 22-year-old daughter, Gemma Saunders, was brutally raped and murdered. Thanks to DNA evidence, her attacker, Christopher Banks, was caught and convicted.
He has no conscience. He laughed when he got handed 5 life sentences.
But Gina Mordecki is still looking for justice because she's learned that the very Virginia State Crime Lab that performed the DNA test on Banks might have been able to prevent her daughter's death.
I want justice to be served for everyone that helped this happen by their negligence.
Her search for answers began here in Virginia Beach. Gemma had recently moved to this picturesque resort from Ohio.
She was very excited about Virginia. She loved Virginia. She liked the weather. She made a lot of new friends.
Mordecki was shocked to discover that a violent rape and stabbing, strikingly similar to the one that killed her daughter, had already happened here 5 months earlier.
It was extremely brutal. We were all very surprised that the victim was able to survive an ordeal like this.
47G.
Virginia Beach homicide detective Steve Dunn searched for the attacker.
We developed Christopher Banks as a potential suspect in this case.
The same Christopher Banks who would later murder Gemma Saunders. Prosecutor Bob Humphreys recalls scrambling to build a case against him.
There was an outstanding shoplifting warrant that charged him with taking a bag of peanuts from a convenience store. It was a misdemeanor charge that we could hold him on and at least get a sample of his DNA.
Humphreys hoped he could keep Banks in jail while Virginia's crime lab completed the test.
We asked the laboratory to put a rush on it because of the fact that we had a very serious set of criminal offenses here.
But days went by, then weeks, and despite repeated calls from police, there were still no results.
Detective Piquel was on the phone to the lab virtually at least every other day, I would say. The response that he was getting from the lab is, we're working on it, just be patient.
And after holding Banks for 30 days, police finally had to release him for lack of any new evidence.
We had this window of opportunity to really do some good things here, and because of whatever bureaucratic snafus occurred in some other agency, it all fell apart.
10 days after he was released, he killed my daughter. Her body was covered with bruises. Her forehead was black and blue from where he must have hit her.
This time, the state's crime lab took just 6 days to test DNA evidence linking Banks to Gemma's murder. Only then did the lab complete the test on the first rape case. It confirmed everyone's worst fears. Banks had committed both crimes.
If the test would have been done, they would never have released him. He would have been in jail, and he would have stayed in jail, and he would not have killed Gemma.
I was about as upset as I think it's possible for a human being to be, because it was just a senseless tragedy as far as I was concerned.
So why did this tragedy happen? Especially when, according to Virginia's DNA crime lab itself, a single DNA analysis usually takes no more than 72 hours to complete. Dr. Paul Ferrara is director of Virginia's DNA crime lab.
If I have 1,000 cases, and every one of those 1,000 cases is top priority, well, then you just don't get them all done. And one has to pick and choose what cases get the high priority. We contributed, our backlog contributed in the death of Gemma Saunders.
So the examiner and you personally feel some level of responsibility?
Sure. I mean, perhaps because I have a backlog.
Backlogs exist because there's more and more demand for DNA testing to solve crimes. Every month, 300 new DNA samples are submitted to this crime lab. It's a struggle just to keep pace with the growing mountain of evidence. And the problem is not limited to Virginia. In many states, the backlog is even worse.
Tremendous backlogs in New York, California, Alabama. You just pick a state and their backlogs.
Milton Nix is the director of Georgia's Bureau of Investigation. Together with other law enforcement chiefs, he's campaigning for more federal money and resources for DNA labs across the country.
Right now, there are probably 180,000 plus sexual assault cases that have not been processed.
And according to the latest Justice Department figures, there are at least another 100,000 untested DNA samples in databases of criminals nationwide. But back in Virginia Beach, both the police and Commonwealth's Attorney's Office believe the backlog does not fully explain why it took the lab so long to complete the test.
The police say that they were, pounding on the door, essentially, trying to get this case done.
Yes, no question. The investigator and the analyst assigned to the case were in communication back and forth with each other. They knew the situation. But again, that's one examiner out of 30 and one investigator out of hundreds, all of whom are clamoring to try to get their work done as soon as possible.
In fairness to the laboratory system, there's no question that they're swamped with requests for work, but there was a major communications breakdown here that cost us the life of a young woman in a neighboring city, and it need not have happened.
It should have been prioritized. I don't care. I can't think of anything that has more priority than that.
Gina Mordecki is so convinced the state lab was at fault, she's considering a lawsuit against them. The state's lab admits no liability.
We tried to expedite it, but because of all of the other cases being done, it wasn't done in time to prevent Christopher Banks from getting released on a shoplifting charge, and the rest is a very sad history.
And while Gina Mordecki still believes the lab was negligent, she agrees the backlog is a problem.
We need to pour some money into this. I mean, if you have a child and you're concerned about their welfare, you would want to see funds allocated for DNA lab work to be done at a speedier rate than it is today. It could save someone's life.
Congress is considering a number of proposals to increase funding for laboratory analysis of DNA evidence. You can join a live chat about the proposals and about the backlog itself at our website beginning at the top of the hour. Dr. Paul Ferrara, whom we saw in Pierre's report, will take your questions at cnn.com/chat.
And coming up,